Reinhard Buetikofer, thanks for coming back, Member of Parliament.
Glad to be here.
In Strasbourg. I wonder what that's like. Someday you'll have to show me that live and in color. Greens just finished their party convention. Deutschland is erneuerbar. Germany is renewable. You know what went through my mind? I was there in '98 when you guys became part of the governing coalition in Bonn, which lasted until 2005. What should be renewed? An old coalition? How can that be renewed? What are you going to do different this time? Or, obviously there's rumors about the fact that you don't necessarily have to do it with the old coalition. You could do it with a new coalition.
Look, let's not start with coalition speculation. That's very fruitless.
Okay.
The slogan obviously alludes to the ongoing discussion about the renewal of German energy policy. We're in the middle of what we call Energiewende, the transition from a fossil nuclear energy base to a 100% renewable energy base, of course taking into account great progress that we hope to make with regard to energy efficiency. And the interesting fact about this is that in the German public, this agenda that used to be proprietary to the Greens has become a broadly shared agenda, but that doesn't necessarily imply that everybody knows how to do it. So we want to play in the upcoming election campaign, of course, on our strength, which is, first and foremost, that most Germans trust us with regard to devising a future-oriented energy policy. And we attack the Merkel government over some of the pitfalls they're creating, about some of the detours they're organizing, some of the impediments they're pushing up. So this is the obvious allusion.
That's the flagship, you would say, the energy.
That's
change.
One flagship.
Okay, what's another?
But the next issue, which resonates at least as much with the German population, is the issue of social justice. The division between rich and poor has been increasing over a considerable period of time. There is a perception that Germany today is a country that is less just, where justice is more in demand than we used to be acquainted to. This relates to tax policy, it relates to all kinds of social policy issues like childcare, education, having access to good high-quality education. So it's a very broad spectrum, and we believe that this is the second topic that will be at the core of the campaign. And then the third dimension of our appeal to the voters is, let's make this an open, friendly country to the world. Let's not close the doors. Let's not heed the temptatious advances from nationalistic or chauvinist or back to the Deutschmark voices. Let's pursue a strategy, a way of really being good European citizens and being good global citizens.
Let me come back to that, because you're touching on a subject that I want to get to, and that is whether there are a lot of centrifugal forces going on in Europe that you have to deal with. But before we get there, let me just go back to this notion of these three flagships. That first one is clear, and you've got the emblem on that. You've got the patent on that.
We're the brand.
Yeah. The second one is social justice. Sounds, by the way, familiar when you're talking about the United States, by the way, in terms of the division within society. The third one, though, you get into this question of social justice and the euro together. I want to come back, and I just want to push you a little bit further, because it seems like those issues are fairly wide consensus issues. Like, for example, the vote on the Cyprus issue in the Bundestag was 500. And I think the Greens were there, right?
Yeah.
On that issue. So there's a broad consensus of which you are a part, right, in terms of dealing with some of these issues. The question is, where can you carve out your particular niche, regardless of the coalition that you're going to go into? I'll stay away from that as you asked me to. But
well, look, if you're standing just at the brink of an abyss and stare down and decide we're not going to jump,
right,
most people would agree. But the next question is, where do we go from here?
Right.
And there the disagreement starts.
Right.
Of course, it was right to support that memorandum of understanding with Cyprus. But on the other hand, that doesn't solve the Cyprus issue.
No.
The business model that Cyprus has been living by for the last couple of years has been destroyed. They have 40% of their GDP relied on the financial sector.
Right.
That's gone. They have to come up with a new business model. And this is something that Europe has to help them with, because of their own, they probably will not be able to construct that. And there we differ from the Chancellor. And the German population is also split. There has been a poll recently in which 2/3 of respondents said that they felt that the Chancellor was more or less paying enough attention to the concerns of Europeans, the southern rim of the European Union, or even too much. And 1/3 said she's not paying enough attention. Those were our voters.
Okay.
We believe that the Chancellor is putting Europe and Germany in a very dangerous position. There is German overreach within the EU. Germans are telling everybody to live by an extreme austerity policy that we're not even implementing at home. Just think back 10 years. You were there
sick man of Europe.
When we were the sick man of Europe,
right,
and when our government, together with the Social Democrats, initiated the labor market reforms.
Yep.
Those were quite contentious reforms at the time. I think we made mistakes, but in a general perspective, it was the right thing to do.
Right.
We did not, at the time, top that with extreme austerity. If we had, the whole thing would have fallen apart. You could even argue that the Germans softened up the Stability and Growth Pact in order to make our own internal reforms successful. Right. Now, why are we teaching everybody else, don't do as we did, do as we tell you? I mean, if we would allow the Greek people, the Cypriot people, the Spanish people to initiate and implement reforms, but loosen up on the austerity front, I think that would be what it needs to create new growth. Well, without new growth, there will not be a solution to the European riddle, and this is what Merkel just doesn't get.
Or she doesn't feel, or she feels like she's constrained to do that because her side of the ledger says don't do that. Your side says you should go ahead and do that. Your voters. It seems to me one of the things that's a problem, and by the way, I would say that the U.S. policy probably falls on your side of the ledger in terms of going ahead and not only just emphasizing the austerity but the growth. It goes back to the Maastricht Treaty. Look, it was stability and growth all the time.
My phrase would be solidarity and solidity.
Right.
Help them, but of course everybody has to do their homework.
Right.
So it's not about being lenient with those who don't want to move forward.
Right.
It's about helping people to stay together.
Help themselves.
And what I really regret a lot is that many actors in Berlin are not judging this from a pan-European perspective anymore. Germany acts as the leader of the Northern Front. Germany does not implement policies that can help the European Union as a whole to progress. Some people talk about Germany as a hegemon. If Germany wanted to even start playing that role, it would have to think about the whole context. We're not behaving like a hegemon, we're behaving like the leader of one party trying to win over the other. I think this is very destructive.
Well, now when you look at that problem, you have obviously the position that Merkel and the FDP are taking, and to some extent you say the Northern Front. I assume you mean the Friends of the North.
Germans, Austrians, Dutch, Swedish, Finn.
So, and they're seeing, I think, increasingly, and now you have it actually in a political movement in Germany, this Alternative for Germany movement, which I assume is just a flash in the pan. But still, it does sort of ring a bell or takes a pulse of the German public that they're also saying, why do we have to bail everybody out?
Well, let the public have their say, which will be on election day in September. I don't think it will be such a successful adventure.
Okay, but
300 German professors of economics don't make a revolution.
Well, I think the problem is, though, that the race is probably going to be pretty close in September, and some people are saying that here's a little piece of the pie that could maybe kip here or there. Look what happened in Lower Saxony. That was a very razor edge result, right? So any little things like this, little volcanoes can make a difference. But let me ask you this. When you talked about, you just said something which I think is very significant. You said it's almost like a front toward the south, a split, a European north, a European south. The problem that I wanted to ask you about is Europe is now, 60 plus years. I mean, is it the case that you're seeing, and I don't mean the parties in Germany, but I do mean elsewhere in Europe, that there are, backlash effects, and maybe understandably, and if you have 50% youth unemployment in Spain, that's a dynamite bomb right there that's waiting to explode. But are you concerned, not just about Germany per se, but generally speaking, that there is a major potential for a major, if you will, explosion in Europe, and people are saying, enough, we don't want any more of this austerity?
Well, I'm not fearing an explosion, I'm rather fearing an implosion. Or just a withering away of the European spirit first,
that's what
and then the relevance of the European institutions.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. Yeah.
I mean, if anti-European populist movements from different member states would make it into the European Parliament next year in a sizable number, which is not completely to be excluded, then that would change, of course, the functioning of the European Parliament as the most important unitary force representing the common will of the European citizens, and that would weaken the European cohesion even more.
Right.
So the European Commission has already been weakened considerably. They are shifting between loud-mouthing federalist ambitions and silently serving the whims of the leaders of the Council. It's a weak commission, I would say. If you remember, Commission President Delors, that was some sort of a leader. Yeah. The Commission is not about leadership, it's about technocracy. And that is also undermining the plausibility of the European idea. Populism and technocracy play into each other's hand, I think. Both are undermining democratic choice and democratic options. I don't think that we're beyond the point of no return. There still is a lot of goodwill vis-à-vis the European Union. But citizens have had very clear expectations for a while now. They say, we want the European Union to deliver better economic governance. We want the European Union to deliver progress on environment and climate because you can't do that nationally. We want the European Union to deliver on foreign and security policy because that also is an issue that we have to deal with together. Now, if you measure real European progress against that yardstick, we fall short on all three counts. There has been some progress. I I'm proud of part of that because the European Parliament has been an active player there with regard to economic governance. The banking union is moving forward. That's good. It's not sufficient, but we're making headway. I don't deny that, but we're still a long way away from where we should get. But with regard, for instance, to environmental and climate policy, we just made a roll backwards. The European Parliament just decided 2 weeks ago that basically they wanted to kill, in effect, the European trading scheme for CO2 emissions, which has the immediate effect of either giving up European climate policy altogether or renationalizing it. So then another reason to be in favor of the European approach falls away. And we must be aware of that danger, that all the positive reasons to support the European narrative and the European idea are not being undermined.
Well, let me ask you then, where the narrative or the leadership that you seem to be missing? In other words, you're saying that the current leadership in Brussels and the Commission is weak. You made a comparison with Jacques Delors, who I quite frankly remember very well. Where's that leadership going to come from? And if it's not going to come from Germany, where is it going to come from?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we're fighting for a victory in the September elections, right. Because I think Germany has to be an integral part of providing that leadership. Exactly. But obviously the present government is not up to the task. But it cannot be done by Germany alone. Mm-hmm. And this is why the present ice age between Berlin and Paris is so dangerous.
Tell me about that.
Well, I've been to Paris recently talking to a think tank, and they tell me there's not a single French journalist that's writing positively about Germany anymore. Not all of them are denouncing Germany, but no positive voice anymore. Then you listen to what's going on inside the Socialist Party of President Hollande, yeah. And there's a war of words with Germany and the German government. Right. And some of the...
But isn't that internal politics, Reinhard? Domestic politics?
It may be domestically initiated, but it has a clear spillover effect on the European level. For instance, President Sarkozy and Chancellor Merkel, when Sarkozy was still in office, agreed that they would propose a common corporate tax scheme for Germany and France. I thought at the time it was a great idea, moving forward against the race to the bottom that we've been seeing with regard to tax regimes, and creating more commonality, creating a core which could have been a starting point for a coalition of the willing within the EU.
Didn't happen.
No, it's not only not happened, no one's working on it. And there are no initiatives that I would be able to point out where Germany and France make an effort to cooperate. Take the example of Mali. The French sent their troops into Mali, which they have been applauded for in the European Parliament from the right to the left, because everybody felt it was the right thing to do at the time. But the Germans didn't even allow the French to use the German Transall transport planes to transport their troops. Not to speak of the European, the Franco-German battalion that could have been used possibly in a common effort to stabilize the situation in Mali. So there's another issue where the two governments don't really cooperate.
Can that get worse before it gets better? I mean, you see Hollande's ratings are very low. He's weak. Sometimes when you're weak, you seek out a boomman of some sort. Germany seems to be playing that role, not just for France, by the way. Can it get worse before it gets better?
Well, I hear too many dismissive voices with regard to France and Berlin. So it
goes both ways, you say.
It goes It goes both ways. It's going to get worse. Whether it's going to get better, I don't know. There are a couple of people in the French government that know Germany, the Prime Minister, for instance. So you can't say this is a government of people that have no clue about Germany. But on the German side, we have fewer people that have a liking for France and that are deeply involved with France. And I always feel that it's mostly the responsibility of the stronger side.
Which right now is Germany.
To make the moves that facilitate new understanding.
Right. Well, you know, the minister, finance minister Schäuble was here recently, and it was quite clear that he was saying, on the one hand, he's worried about France financially, economically, but he said it's absolutely central for Germany to keep that bond going. The question is, as you say, who's taking care of it? Who's massaging that relationship, and how?
I've also heard some very curious remarks here in Washington with regard to U.S.-EU relations, talking about TTIP. As someone, high-ranking person from the business sector, told me, look, it's the German task to bring the French on board. Right. I mean, if the U.S. takes such an attitude, dealing with Europe as if it was Germany's backyard, and not dealing with the French as an equal partner in the transatlantic relationship, that's also not helping.
Yeah, no, I see that point. It used to be that when the equation was different, you know, the French-German equation was sometimes called a horse and rider, and guess who was the rider? It's different now. Now you mentioned the United States, and let me go to my third topic, Obama. You and I were in, presumably you were in Berlin in 2008.
I wasn't.
You were. I was. The day that he gave that speech where 250,000 people went up and saw the rock concert at the end.
Look, even before the term was invented, I didn't want to be one of those fawning Germans.
Well, okay, okay. Well, there were a lot of them that day, right? So now we're 4 or 5 years later, and you know, after many complaints in Berlin, as far as I've heard, he's now apparently going to go to Berlin. Who knows? Might change, but in any event, the idea is he'll be there in the middle of June, spend a day. He's presumably not going to go up in front of the Siegessäule and attract 250,000 people anymore. What would you advise the president, if you were in the White House in the West Wing, to say to this group of Germans in 2013 that might be listening to what he has to say? What would you advise him to say to the Germans?
This is funny. This reminds me of a question, a similar question that has been put to me a couple of years ago when George W. Bush came to Berlin. A friend of mine from the Aspen Institute asked me, if you could identify one sentence you would want to see in the speech of the president, what would it be?
This is George W. Bush.
George W. Bush.
Okay.
And I said, well, his father, when he spoke about partnership in leadership. Maybe he could come back to that remark. And I don't know whether my friend communicated that to the entourage of President Bush, but in his speech before the Bundestag, President George W. Bush indeed mentioned the words. He said, partnership in leadership has been accomplished, which of course...
Is that mission accomplished?
which of course was utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
It just said, let's get rid of that. Let's not deal with that anymore. Yeah. So you often should think twice what you wish for.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you when you ask me what do I wish,
yeah.
I think what the it's no use if President Obama tells the European, look, even though we're pivoting to the Asia Pacific, we still love you dearly, and you're I don't know what. Everybody sees the reality of the shift of the focus of American attention. Mm-hmm. And I don't think this is unrealistic.
The shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what the United States have to do, I would argue. And it was quite good when a year ago, Hillary Clinton at the Munich Security Conference told the Europeans, look, don't complain, do your own pivot.
Which Germany's certainly doing.
But now, I think what President Obama could do, he could define more specifically what the United States wants to invest in with regard to the transatlantic relationship and what the ambitions are there. Not giving us any sweet honey or empty promises, but being realistic. At a conference in Brussels recently in the transatlantic context, someone said the transatlantic relationship looks like a marriage in search of a spark. Well, that's really how it looks. And I don't think that TTIP alone is going to solve that problem. We need a more broadly based dialogue about where we want to go. Sometimes, also in the context of TTIP, I hear voices arguing that we should pursue a strategy of circling the wagons against the rising powers,
China.
The West against the rest. I think this is a foolhardy strategy. We should find new ways of partnering with the world. And how do we do that, and how do we implement that, and where's the practical relevance of the transatlantic relationship in this context?
Let me ask you something specific on that. It's very interesting what you say, because last night I was listening to Hillary Clinton, and she was saying that we have this TTIP and we have this partnership, and we are 800 million strong, 300 here, 500 there. We will have to write the rules before somebody else writes them. Do you think that's the zero-sum game that you don't like to hear? Is that what you're saying to me?
Look, do I like European and American transparency standards better than Chinese ones?
I think you do.
Guess I do. Same with human rights, same with corruption. I mean, there are a couple of values-oriented issues where it's not hard to choose.
Yeah.
But the idea that we could somehow lock in Western trade dominance for the next I don't know how many decades is just self-illusioning. That's not going to happen. So we should indeed cooperate, create efficiencies, but what we should make sure we don't forget about while we're doing that is we should clearly define where we want to go. And when I see some of the papers with regard to TTIP, I see much too little ambition with regard to creating really modern 21st century low-carbon economies.
Globally.
Well, there we could give an example, the US and the EU. There we could lead the pack. How do we reduce, for instance, vast fossil subsidies?
Right.
The G20 agreed years ago that that fossil subsidies should be abolished. No one's been moving. Why can't we start moving between us? How are we going to transform our economies with regard to energy efficiency and resource efficiency? That could be a very interesting perspective. There we can lead.
But more catalytic than protective is what you're saying, I think.
Right.
Yeah, okay. That's what's missing in the current discussion about this TTIP thing? That's what you want to leave us with?
I see more sectoral ambition with regard to specific industrial sectors. And sometimes I think the suspicion is justified that the American financial industry that doesn't like Dodd-Frank is trying to use the transatlantic negotiations to get around it. And similarly, some of the chemical industry who don't like the European REACH legislation want to use the help of DuPont to get rid of that. I mean, that's I understand that there might be such interest, but this is not a strategic perspective that gives us a good future.
I see your point. I mean, the domestic, as often as one said in the past 10, 15, 20 years, the domestic politics, our transatlantic domestic politics, have become entwined, and we use each other sometimes for the purposes that you just mentioned. Therefore, it's not, I guess to get my final point in here, it's not just that Europe needs a new narrative, we need a new narrative in general, above and beyond our own teacups, right?
Right.
Okay. One more thing. We celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Greens moving into the Bundestag in 1983 with a publication that we here at Institutes published this last spring. And we, AICGS, is also 30 years old, Reinhard. So you know that we have something in common here as well.
So you and us together are as old as I am.
There we go. Thank you, Reinhard, very much for being here with us.